The first Knytt game, by Knytt, has a character stranded on an unfamiliar world after being abducted in a spaceship that crashes and loses all of its parts. In that game, there are no power-ups. One can only explore the world. If encountering an obstacle, the player can die and respawn, but there is never any sort of movement progression. The only ability our player has besides running, jumping and climbing is, after a button press, the direction toward the nearest spaceship part is shown. Our goal is to collect all the spaceship parts so we could fix the spaceship and return home. A year later, Knytt made a game called Knytt Stories, which included a level editor, and in the year of 2007 was a very big deal to many worldwide. Knytt Stories was a freeware game, which meant it was free. Anyone could create levels. Knytt Stories came with an expansion pack of 4 extra games, one of them being called A Strange Dream. This game was similar to the first Knytt. Very little story shown, and we have to rescue an abducted family member. And we have no idea where they are. We have no ability to see where we need to go. In fact, what makes Knytt Stories different is that we start with no abilities at all. We can jump, die, and respawn, but no way to climb. Our jump is also quite short. Instead, Knytt Stories is much more in line with the Metroidvania genre, where one has to explore a world to gain abilities and then go back to areas previously inaccessible. This causes the player to go out searching the world to find these abilities and hopefully find a path to the person they lost. But Knytt Stories: A Strange Dream doesn't really tell you that at all. Every time you find a new ability, you have to figure it out yourself. In fact, from the very first moment when you load up the game, the actual window size of the game starts very small, and it doesn't tell you why. And it feels very intentional. It feels like everything is designed in a way to make you feel like you're appearing into a small world, an unfamiliar world. The amount of biomes and areas in Knytt Stories is insane. Off the top of my head, there's a mushroomy area that you start in, there's a jungly savanna type of place, a glowing lily pad swamp, a laboratory, weird bee caves, an oriental inspired village, a cloudy fairy kingdom, a large castle. All these areas tend to house enemies that can kill you, but they also house background elements. Background NPCs, if you will, that look like characters that belong in their respective areas, but you can't interact with them, you can't talk to them. They're just there. Clearly in their element, clearly the world is familiar to them, but not to you. Knytt sets up a game where each area is quite different in some way to the previous, and this adds a sort of charm, where you don't know at all where you're going next, to a degree. Because despite all the different areas, everything feels like it belongs to the same world. The human-like creatures, the spritey art style, all similar. It still feels like everything is one playable microworld. This intentionality that Knytt demonstrates, the way all is designed to convey a certain feeling of unfamiliarity, is important. In games made by future creators, this could act as a blueprint for their future work. If one wished to create a game about how a foreigner sees a world, they would make the screen small. They make any new place encountered have no dialogue, no way to interact with the people there. The player feels like a foreigner, just as much as the character they are controlling. If one wished to create a game about frogs, for example, looking back at Knytt can remind them to design the world based on how a frog sees it. How do they engage with the world? They jump, they waddle through the world. An image of a frog does not inspire danger in one's mind, so the world should reflect this. The audio-visual elements could be very pretty, very charming, like a frog relaxing in a river. It feels like a main part of Knytt Stories is the world, a fun to explore world in the right circumstances. What allows this world to be explored is the player character and how they move. And the player character zooms! They go quite fast through the world. There's almost no time to properly take in an area of the world, even if it looks pretty, because you're already likely to be zipping through. Of course, a player can stop and look and observe. And when going into an area for the first time, I believe Knytt's intent is to make a player go, whoa, that's cool. This is evidenced by how some of the background set pieces you find tend to be more imposing than anything seen earlier, and how the areas are so different. The fact you find these new places by moving in different ways also attributes to this, and the fact we go fast means we can see more. There is a multitude of abilities to unlock. They allow the player to jump higher, wall jump, float, see invisible platforms. The constant about all of these is that Knytt, again intentionally, doesn't tell us what ability we have unlocked. In fact, the game doesn't tell us how to jump either. It is only by spamming the only controller we have available to us, the keyboard, that we are able to learn what our abilities do. In this moment, we become conscious of something outside the game, which is the controller. And this again adds to the unfamiliarity theme that Knytt has. We don't know what we've picked up, and we don't know how to use it yet. We've only have what we know to figure it out. This means a player may never figure out the umbrella also shields attacks, or that if you press down while sliding on a wall, you go down faster. Again, this dissonance between what a player knows, what a player can do, is constantly felt throughout the game. Future games being made can keep in mind that they do not need to tell the player how to play explicitly. Rather, they can look upon how Knytt trusts the player to figure out controls themselves. However, again, like Knytt, this process may only work if it is done with intent. There could be a reason why a player doesn't need an explicit tutorial, such as to stimulate the feeling of being foreign, like in Knytt's case. The movement itself also has to be a deliberate choice. Knytt's movement is very quick, moving from screen to screen, which encourages the movement between the many different areas in different ways. Using an example of a game about frogs again, perhaps in this game, the choice of movement itself would have to reflect the froggy feel of the game, as well as what emotions the game is trying to stimulate. If it is a more pleasant, cute frog game, the jump might feel more bouncy. If more realistic, then with more weight. The way movement is taught would also parallel the themes of the game. If frogs are thought to be free creatures with no restraint, then perhaps a method similar to Knytt, where the player figures out how to move themselves, might work best, just as how a frog figures out how to move by themselves. Knytt Stories' A Strange Dream has very particular themes to its game, and is able to reiterate these themes at every opportunity. A small screen size, the inability to talk to NPCs, the many areas, and the movement that allows one to go through it all reflect the tone that the game wishes to convey. Perhaps game developers could remember Knytt in their game-making process, to remember that sometimes the most conventional decision would not reflect the themes of their game, and could perhaps try a different way.